Perhaps you're familiar with one of the most important battles of the Revolutionary War, when Washington attacked Trenton, New Jersey on Christmas Eve, 1776. Now, what you probably know about that battle comes from this famous painting, which portrays Washington and his troops crossing over the icy Delaware on that fateful evening. Now, this dramatization, it's emblazoned upon our mind as the embodiment of how we defeated the British. But what you may not know is what actually happened on that icy Christmas Eve. So things had not been going well for the Revolutionary Army. Under Washington's leadership, they had lost New York City and other strategic points in the region. And as winter began to set in, the troops, they were run down, hungry, and dejected. Washington needed a win, so he had been meticulously planning this attack on the Hessian troops who had been aiding the British. He decided he wanted to attack on Christmas Eve because it would be unexpected. According to normal military decorum, there was a gentleman's agreement that you did not attack on a religious holiday. And so Washington thought, well, this is the perfect opportunity because it will catch them off guard. So Washington and his troops, they start marching toward the rendezvous point, but immediately the weather begins to deteriorate. The temperature drops, it begins to snow, and before they know it, they're 3 hours behind. And when they get to the rendezvous point, they look into the Delaware and it's full of ice, so even crossing over is going to be a real problem for them. On top of this, what Washington didn't know is that 2 of his men had defected and told the Hessians that he was coming. So Washington was walking into a death trap. Surveying the situation, realizing the odds were stacked against him, he decided to take the risk of his men possibly being captured, and they would have been had it not been for a little stroke of luck on his part. So Colonel Rahl, who was in charge of the Hessian troops, he was waiting for Washington to arrive. But as the weather deteriorated, he thought to himself, no general in his right mind would try to attack under these conditions. And he's right. No general in his right mind would. But Washington wasn't in his right mind. He was desperate. So Colonel Rahl, he tells his troops that they're allowed to go celebrate Christmas. So they go back in their tents, they bundle up because they're freezing, and they start drinking copious amounts of alcohol. Now, the fact that Washington was 3 hours late to the rendezvous point, this served him well because by the time he actually got over to Trenton and invaded the camp, most of the Hessians were passed out drunk in their tents, so it made them easy targets. In the end, the Revolutionary Army only lost 4 soldiers and they captured 1,000 Hessians. Now, from a strategic standpoint, this win meant very little, but it achieved 2 things. First, it was a huge morale booster for the colonists and the Revolutionary Army. And 2, it taught Washington something very important, that if he was going to be able to be successful against the British, he was going to have to use surprise attacks and unconventional tactics, which he did throughout the rest of the war, and it's the reason why they won. Now, Washington was taking a huge risk by crossing over the Delaware that evening. I would say it's one of the biggest risks a leader of a country has ever taken. Had he gone over and the weather hadn't been as bad as it was, and had the Hessians been waiting, likely he would have been captured along with his troops, and that likely would have changed the outcome of the Revolutionary War and the trajectory of our country. Of course, we all love it when people take big risks and those risks pay off. But what happens when someone takes a risk and it doesn't pay off? What happens when you put yourself out there and things don't turn out the way you'd hoped? The fact is, we all take risks in our lives. The question is, when is the risk worth the reward? And when should we maybe step back from that gamble? To begin, I want to introduce you to a friend of mine who has taken a lot of risks in his life. Will you join me in the kitchen? So I want to say welcome to Sunil Bhave. Welcome to Kokoro.
Thank you for having me.
So whenever we do this segment, I always make some food that's associated with the theme. And today we're talking about risk. And since you and I have known each other for a long time, and one of our favorite meals to eat together is saag paneer, I thought I would try making some homemade saag, which is a huge risk because I know how much you like your saag, you know how much I like it. So I think we should give it a try. And then afterwards, I want you to tell our audience a little bit about yourself. How's that sound?
That sounds great. Looking forward to it.
Give it a try.
We definitely took a risk, but it was a risk worthwhile taking because it tastes really good, Alex.
Decent?
Very good.
So, Sunil, tell us a little bit about your background as a lawyer and as a judge.
Sure, yeah, I served as a lawyer for 20 years. I was a public service lawyer, which means I represented the people. Most of my career was with the Illinois Attorney General's office, where I defended the state of Illinois and the people of the state of Illinois in lawsuits that were filed against them. I litigated cases both in the trial court, so we had jury trials and trials in front of judges, and also at the Court of Appeals. And I even was fortunate to have a couple opportunities to argue some big cases in front of the Illinois Supreme Court.
What made you want to go from being a lawyer to being a judge?
I think with every lawyer who's a litigator who does public service work, your primary goal is to help people. And every lawyer, you come to a certain point in your career and you start thinking, is there something more that I can do to continue in a public service role helping people? And maybe I could be a judge and help people resolve their disputes when they can't resolve their disputes on their own.
So how do you even go about becoming a judge? I think that's, a lot of people probably have no idea how you would do that. Like, I know people think, oh, you got to go to law school.
Definitely.
But what's
That's the first step.
But then, like, how do you get to that point where you can actually be a judge in a courtroom?
Well, the first thing is you have to be a lawyer. So you can't be a judge without being a lawyer first. And then it takes years of experience. But there's really two ways to become a judge. One is you can run in an election. And that's like an election like any other election. In November, every 2 years, we have elections. You go to the ballot, you punch your candidates, and you'll see a number of judges on those ballots. And if you get more votes than your opponent, you become a judge, right? A lot easier said than done. But that's the electoral way. There's also another process where those same elected judges, and here in our county, there are 250 elected judges, they choose appointed associate judges. And so I applied to be an associate judge, and you campaign, just like you would campaign in a normal election, but your voters are the elected judges. So you go around the county and you try to convince the elected judges to choose you as appointed judge.
So you got to a point where you decided, okay, I'm going to go for it. I'm going to run for judge. Will you kind of take us through the process of what you decided to do?
Yeah, in 2016, I thought I have enough experience to become a judge. I took that leap of faith and I applied to put in an application to be considered as an associate judge.
And what happened in the first time you tried it?
I came up short. I couldn't convince the voters, the judges, to vote for me.
And so then you decide, okay, I'm going to do it again. When did the next time happen?
So in 1 year later, 2017, there was another opportunity, and I thought I learned a lot in 2016, so I'm going to try one more time.
And you went in, you did it, and outcome?
Lost again.
And how did that feel? I mean, that had been hard.
Yeah, it's tough because the first time you run, you have your hopes up and you don't get it. So the second time you think, well, I've already done it once, now I'm going to get it. And it makes you feel pretty dejected to try twice and come up short twice.
But then there was a span of time in between the second time and the third time because you just said, okay, like I'm going to do it. I'm going to try again. When did that happen?
2021, 4 years passed. I had 17 years as a lawyer by that point. So I said third time's the charm.
And what happened that time?
And I came up short for a third time.
I mean, that's got to be really hard because you've had this dream in your mind for a long time. And now you've put yourself out there 3 times. And the third time, it's like, okay, I'm taking the risk. I'm going for it for the third time. And you said third time's a charm. And
I lost. And it's really, you really feel a sense of dejection there. And you start questioning whether this dream will ever become a reality.
How did you get yourself back up to do it again? Because I mean, it feels like you keep like you're taking risks by going out and doing this every time, I feel like.
Well, you definitely are, because you're taking many risks. One, you're putting yourself out there. When you run for judge, be it for an election or for associate judge, it's very publicly known that you were trying to become a judge. And in 2021, I was actually a finalist. I was put on a short list. So I was down to, we had 22 openings that year, and they chose 44 people to campaign for the final 22 spots. I made the cut. We're talking 600, 700, 800 people apply for these jobs. I made the cut to the top 44. But when you said your dream to become a judge, my dream to become a judge really was instilled in me when I worked for a judge in 2006. So by now, it's been 15 years that I had been thinking about the possibility of one day becoming a judge.
You decide though, I'm not giving up. I'm going to do it again. Like you're getting yourself back up, and you decide you're going to go for it one more time, yeah?
Correct, yeah. I thought in 2023 there was one more opportunity to become a judge. And I thought, if I'm going to make this a reality, I have to try. I was always comfortable, though, with the idea that becoming a judge would not materialize. I always understood that was a possibility. But what worried me was I wouldn't try to make that possibility a reality. And that's why I tried again in 2023.
And then what happened that time?
Lo and behold, I made it. I made it finally. And so now I'm an appointed associate judge in Cook County, Illinois.
Why do you think it is worth the risk of reaching for your dreams when sometimes when you take that risk, it doesn't work out?
Right. Well, you'll never know whether it works out or it doesn't work out unless you take that risk and you take that leap of faith. If you have a dream, and I've had a dream of being a judge for many years, I was committed to helping people and I wanted to achieve that dream. But I wouldn't have never known whether that dream could have become a reality unless I took that risk. And I should say, when we talk about risk, the type of risk I took was a very calculated risk. I'm not a gambler. I'm not taking an uncalculated risk. I thought I had a legitimate chance to become a judge. But at some point, you have to take that leap of faith and put yourself out there in the public arena and even subject yourself to possible criticism from people. That's a very scary proposition for many people. But unless you do that, you'll never know whether your dreams can be achieved.
So I just want to say thank you for being here. You're just such a remarkable individual. I think your integrity speaks volumes, what you bring to the courtroom. And it's an honor to be able to call you a friend. And thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you, Alex.
Of all the risks we will take in our lives, perhaps the greatest risk is loving another person. I mean, think about it for a second. You end up being so vulnerable when you love someone because you put your love out there and it might not be reciprocated. Or you put it out there and then maybe after a while, that person who said they loved you, they decide, you know what, I don't love you anymore. All of us understand the heartbreak of having our love thrown back in our face. And for some of us, that wound that we feel is so incredibly great that we end up not wanting to have love in our lives any longer. We look at that wound on our heart and we say to ourselves, you know what? I don't ever want to be that vulnerable ever again. And that starts at different points in our lives. For some of us, it begins when we're children and our caretakers, they don't treat us the way that they should. For others, these wounds form when they fall in love with potential mates, and still others with the dissolution of friendships. Regardless of how it happens, love represents a gamble they are not willing to take because the risks outweigh the rewards. So they wall themselves off from the world so as not to get hurt any further. I think part of the problem is the way that we tend to approach relationships these days. We often ask the question of ourselves, well, what is this person going to do for me? How are they going to serve my needs? And the moment you ask this question, there's an imbalance that occurs. Because now the relationship is transactional. When I ask the question, what are you going to do for me? Well, that means my love is conditional. I love you as long as you meet my needs. But the moment I'm not happy, well, I start questioning my love for you. Now, of course, that's not what love is all about. Love is about two people who are mutually invested in the other person. Love is about you giving everything to that other person and that other person giving everything to you. If you fundamentally view love as an act of giving, then generally speaking, you're both going to have your needs met because both of you are going to be looking out for the needs of the other. The problem with love as an act of giving is that it makes you super vulnerable. I think this is why most people prefer to view love as something that they receive rather than something that they give. Because if I can just bask in the love that you lavish upon me, I never have to place myself in harm's way. But that's not love. That's narcissism. Real love, true love, requires risk. And if you'll join me upstairs, I'd like to tell you about why I believe love is always worth the risk. I think all of us have been like George Washington trying to cross the Delaware River. We've been crazy and we're willing to take a huge risk. And sometimes that huge risk pays off and it changes the trajectory of our life. Other times we take that risk, like my friend Sunil, and it doesn't exactly turn out the way we hoped. But each of us has to ask ourselves a question. Is the risk worth the reward? Are we willing to endure the pain that comes with that risk possibly not working out? I can tell you that for myself, both personally and professionally, whenever I've taken a risk, I've learned a lot of life lessons. And you would think that after having gotten burned over and over again, that I would just stop taking risks altogether. But the truth is, I've learned from experience that the pain will eventually subside, the wounds will eventually heal, and I'll be ready for the next experience. But of all the risks I've taken in my life, loving with my whole heart has been the greatest. But it was a risk I was willing to take because love is what makes life worthwhile. And I know what some of you are sitting there thinking. You're thinking to yourself, you know what, Alex, I keep putting myself out there. I keep getting rejected. I feel like I'm not lovable. Well, here's the thing. You are lovable. Everyone is lovable. You just have to find the person who you're willing to take a risk on, and they're willing to take a risk on you. Most of the people who I come across who struggle in the arena of love, it's because there's a mismatch. What they think they want is not what they really need, and what they need is not what they really want. And this mismatch is super common. It's what happened to me. I was looking for love in all the wrong places with all the wrong people. But when I found the right people in the right places, well, the world opened up to me. And when you're given that opportunity, you have a choice. Are you going to open your heart? Are you going to be vulnerable and love? And if you do that, well, the impact can be immeasurable. So I've been to more than 50 funerals during my lifetime. And I can tell you that the funerals where there's the most tears shed are when the person who we're mourning has loved with their whole heart. Because they didn't just love their partner, they didn't just love their family, they didn't just love their friends, they loved their whole community. That love changed lives. And so what this tells me is that the people who are willing to be vulnerable, the people who are willing to love with their whole hearts without fear of rejection, those are the people who leave the world better than they found it. This is why, in my opinion, love is always worth the risk. And it's why I end every episode of Kokoro by saying, no matter who you are, no matter where you've been, no matter how you feel, please know that you are loved, you are seen, and you are cared for, if by no one else, by me. My name is Alex Lang, and until next time.